The air at Fort Jackson clung to my skin like wet canvas heavy with heat and the weight of expectation. It was the third week of basic combat training, the week everyone called the breaking point, the week when either you pushed through or you gave up. My boots pounded against the packed dirt as the cadence echoed across the field. My lungs screamed, my chest heaved, and each stride sent knives of fire through my legs. I was only 19, barely past the age of being called a girl. Yet here I was trying to prove I had the right to wear this uniform. Sweat blurred my vision, and as I stumbled over a small ridge of dirt, my knees slammed into the ground. Pain shot upward, sharp and immediate. The taste of iron filled my mouth as I realized I had bitten my lip. Blood traced a warm path across my chin. My body begged me to stop. The drill sergeant's whistle shrieked somewhere behind me, but no one rushed forward. No one offered a hand. I forced myself onto my palms, grit biting into my skin, and tried to rise. Then I felt a shadow. Hannah, my stepsister. 20 years old, a year older, taller, stronger, and always the one my mother praised. She leaned down her voice low enough for me alone, but her smile meant for everyone around. "She's too weak," she whispered, her tone dripping with contempt. She pressed her boot lightly against my shoulder and gave the smallest shove, just enough to send me collapsing back onto the dirt. A ripple of laughter followed, the kind that burrows into your bones, the kind you never forget. A couple of recruits smirked, one even clapped mockingly. My face burned hotter than the Carolina sun, and shame mixed with blood at the back of my throat. Sergeant Wallace stood a few paces away, arms crossed, watching. He said nothing. He did not scold Hannah. He did not help me up. His silence was its own judgment, a verdict without words. For a split second, I was not at Fort Jackson anymore. I was back in Charleston, 17 years old, standing in my bedroom, staring at the shredded remains of my prom dress, the one Hannah had ruined hours before the dance. My mother Linda had walked inside and said, "Stop being dramatic, Olivia." Richard, my stepfather, had laughed and muttered, "You never looked good in blue anyway." That same helplessness filled me now, crawling under my skin. But I was not that powerless girl anymore. At least I wanted to believe I wasn't. I clenched my fists against the dirt and pushed my arms, trembling but steady enough to lift me. My breath came ragged, my chest hammered, but I forced myself upright. Hannah's smirk widened. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. A spectacle, a reminder to everyone that Olivia Bennett would always be second best. I locked eyes with her for just a moment, and in that flicker of silence, I felt my resolve harden. I swallowed the blood in my mouth, straightened my spine, and kept running, even as pain screamed through every joint. The jeers followed me, but so did the memory of my father's voice, the one I lost too early. He had served, he had believed in truth over power, and I could almost hear him now. "Do not give them your tears. Give them your endurance." I wanted to collapse again, but anger carried me farther than muscle. Anger and the bitter knowledge that Hannah had always thrived on my pain. She had followers even here, people willing to laugh at cruelty because it was easier than standing against it. And Sergeant Wallace, with his silence, had chosen to let it slide, another wound disguised as discipline. I crossed the line, last chest-heaving legs shaking. Some clapped mockingly, others shrugged indifferent. Hannah leaned close once more, her breath hot against my ear. "You will never make it. You should quit before you embarrass yourself more." I bit down hard, not on my lip this time, but on the words that begged to rise. Not yet. My day would come. The humiliation scorched me raw, but in its burn I found a thread of iron. I would not quit. I would not let her story be the only one people told about me. The field blurred, voices faded, and all I could hear was my own heart pounding. Fear and shame clawed at me, but beneath the bruise, beneath the blood, something else stirred. A promise. One day she would regret underestimating me, and I knew the world would watch when that moment came. Have you ever seen someone humiliated in plain sight and wanted to scream for them, to fight for them? What would you do if it was your own family inflicting the cruelty? Tell me in the comments. I will read every word. Charleston, South Carolina was where my story began. not under the banners of discipline or the chants of drill sergeants, but in a modest two-story house where silence often weighed more than words. My mother Linda remarried when I was 12, and that was the day the lines of loyalty in my life were redrawn without my consent. Richard Carter walked into our lives with an easy smile and a daughter of his own, Hannah. At first, I wanted to believe this new chapter might be better. My father had passed away years earlier, leaving me clinging to memories of his steady voice and the way he taught me to ride my bike down our neighborhood street. When Richard moved in, I thought maybe he would fill a little of that empty space. Instead, it became Hannah who filled every corner of the house. From the moment she arrived, the balance tipped. She was praised for her grades, her looks, her charm, while I became the shadow in the background. I remember the day of my junior prom as if it were carved into me. I had saved for months, working part-time at a grocery store, to buy a dress that shimmered deep blue under the soft light of my room. It was the first time I truly felt beautiful, like I might step out from invisibility. Hours before the dance, I walked in to find the fabric shredded jagged tears that could never be repaired. Hannah sat on my bed, scissors still in her hand, her face calm, even amused. I shouted, my voice breaking, but when Linda came running, she sighed as though I was a child overreacting. "Stop being dramatic, Olivia," she said, her eyes brushing past me to Hannah. Richard chuckled from the doorway. "You never looked good in blue anyway." That moment branded me. It was not just about a dress. It was about the message in this house: Hannah could not be wrong and I could not be right. My school achievements followed the same script. I studied hard-earned honors, dreamed of scholarships. Hannah would breeze through assignments, and when she was praised, Richard would take her out for ice cream or surprise her with a new phone. When my report card came home with straight A's, Linda offered a small nod and said, "That's expected." Their silence pressed heavier than their words. Each time I felt invisible, each time my efforts were dismissed, a part of me hardened. I learned to tuck my feelings into quiet corners, to hide tears in the shower, to build armor no one could see. But even armor bends under constant pressure. One winter evening, after Richard scolded me for speaking back to Hannah, I sat outside on the porch, breath visible in the cold air, and whispered to myself, "I will leave. I will carve a place where their words cannot reach me." That promise kept me alive through the final years of high school. When a recruiter visited our school describing the discipline, the challenge, the chance to serve, my heart clenched. The Army became more than a career path. It became my escape. I thought I had found my way out when I was 17. My grades were strong. My debate trophies lined a modest shelf above my desk, and the letter from the University of South Carolina confirmed I had earned a full scholarship. For one brief season, I believed hard work could overcome favoritism. I carried that letter around like a talisman, unfolding it again and again, letting my eyes rest on the words that promised a future free of debt and free of Richard's smirks. But Hannah could never let me have a victory. Weeks later, I was summoned to the school office. The scholarship had been revoked. My counselor looked at me with pity, explaining there had been a report of plagiarism in my application essay. I was stunned. I had written every word myself. My essay had poured from long nights of coffee and tears, but someone had planted the accusation. It was only later through whispers I overheard that I learned Hannah had emailed the admissions office posing as a concerned peer and claimed I had copied my essay. Linda never questioned her. Richard, with a faint smile, said, "Maybe now you'll learn honesty matters." They gave Hannah a brand new red convertible for graduation, a gift wrapped in false pride. I stood on the porch watching her drive away, my own future gutted. The debt I had avoided now clamped down like iron chains. The humiliation ate at me, and yet inside something shifted. Rage, determination. The promise I had whispered to the cold night air sharpened into a vow. Then came Gary. He was my first real love, a boy with kind eyes and an easy laugh. We met in college after I took out loans to attend a smaller program. For a while, he made me believe I could have a family of my own that didn't echo with cruelty. We dreamed together late nights full of whispered plans. But Hannah could not stand being outside my circle of happiness. She appeared at our coffee shop dates uninvited, her smile sweet, but her words poisonous. She leaned toward Gary when I left for the counter, whispering doubts, hinting I wasn't ready for commitment. Seeds of suspicion grew in him. Our arguments multiplied. When I confronted Hannah, Linda said, "She's just trying to protect you from making a mistake," and Richard smirked as if my pain was entertainment. Gary eventually walked away, and I was left clutching unpaid bills and a hollow heart. The betrayal piled up like bricks on my back. Yet from that rubble rose something unbreakable. I could not rely on scholarships that could be stolen or love that could be poisoned. I needed a foundation they could not touch. That foundation was service. The Army did not care about Hannah's smirk or Linda's dismissive sighs. The Army measured push-ups, endurance, mental grit. It measured the things I could control. When I signed my enlistment papers at 18, I felt the first breath of freedom in years. My mother's only words were, "You will not last 10 days." Richard added, "Discipline isn't for dreamers." Hannah simply smiled as if she already planned to meet me there and prove I would fail again. Their voices echoed in my ears as I boarded the bus to Fort Jackson. Yet even as fear curled in my stomach, I clenched my fists and whispered, "I will last. I will outlast all of you." The first morning at Fort Jackson began with the shrill bark of orders echoing through the reception hall, boots stomping against concrete, the metallic scent of freshly issued gear filling the air. I clutched my duffel nerves, a steady drumbeat in my chest. I told myself this was my rebirth, the clean slate I had dreamed about during every long night in Charleston. Then my blood turned cold. Standing 2 rows ahead, hair tied back tight, uniform crisp and smirk already painted across her lips, was Hannah, my stepsister, the last person I expected to see in the same unit, the same training cycle, the same place I had chosen to escape her shadow. For a second, I thought my eyes had deceived me, that fatigue had conjured her face. But when she turned, her gaze locked with mine, and that sly grin told me this was no mistake. She had followed me even here. My stomach knotted, fury and dread twisting together. During orientation, Sergeant Wallace paced like a wolf, his voice cutting through the nervous whispers. He barked commands, assigned bunks, laid out the rules with the weight of authority. You will push until you break. You will run until you vomit. You will obey until obedience is instinct. His words should have terrified me, but instead it was Hannah's gaze that set my skin crawling. She whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "This will be fun." I knew then she had not come to serve her country. She had come to dismantle me piece by piece. The first drill was a simple endurance run meant to sort out who had prepared and who had coasted through life. My heart pounded as we lined up, the humid Carolina morning sticking to our skin. I focused on my breathing, reminding myself this was my chance to prove I belonged. The whistle blew and we surged forward. The ground vibrated beneath dozens of boots. I pushed myself hard, my arms pumping, lungs burning. The heat rose like a wall, sweat soaked through my shirt, but I kept my eyes fixed on the trail ahead. I would not be last. I would not stumble. Yet fatigue crept in, slowing my stride, my breath coming ragged. I gritted my teeth, pushing harder. That was when I felt the sting of water splashing across my face. For a moment, I thought it was sweat dripping until I turned and saw Hannah beside me, canteen in hand, smirk curling her lips. She had poured the water straight into my face, mocking as she ran smoothly past. "Thirsty Olivia," she sneered. Laughter rippled from a few recruits behind us, the sound slicing into me sharper than the sting of the water. I stumbled, coughing, nearly losing my rhythm. Sergeant Wallace glanced our way but said nothing, only blowing his whistle at another recruit who had slowed. Hannah's trick had gone unnoticed, or worse, ignored. I pushed myself to recover my throat, raw, my pride aching. The run dragged on each stride, heavier than the last. I could feel Hannah's presence just ahead, just close enough to remind me she still had the power to humiliate me. My body screamed for rest, but I refused to quit. When we finally crossed the finish, my chest was heaving, legs trembling. I collapsed to one knee, gasping for breath. Hannah walked by, her hair damp, but her posture perfect, and leaned close enough to whisper in my ear, "Still weak. Some things never change. The words landed harder than the run itself. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms, forcing myself not to respond, not to give her the satisfaction. But deep inside, rage pulsed hot, a vow forming in the marrow of my bones. She would not win here. Not this time. That night in the barracks, I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling, the sounds of recruits settling into uneasy sleep filling the room. My body ached from the drill, but it was the humiliation that burned most. Hannah had followed me to Fort Jackson, and she had wasted no time in turning training into her stage. I replayed the run again and again in my mind, the splash of water, the laughter, the whisper. Each repetition fueled the anger coiling in my chest. I could leave. I could prove my mother right, walk away, and confirm every cruel word Richard had ever said. Or I could stay endure and fight not with fists, but with proof, with strength, with the one thing they never expected me to have: resilience. I whispered into the dark, a promise only I could hear. I will outlast you, Hannah. This time I will win. The mess hall at Fort Jackson was a cavernous room that swallowed voices and magnified the clatter of trays, the scrape of boots, and the nervous chatter of recruits who were still adjusting to life stripped of comforts. By the second week, I had learned to move quickly to keep my head down and to grab whatever food was offered without complaint. The air always smelled of powdered eggs, burnt coffee, and disinfectant, a combination that clung to my clothes long after we left. I carried my tray, carefully weaving through the crowded tables, searching for an open seat. That was when I felt it, the sudden cold of gravy and potatoes sliding down my front. My breath caught as I looked down to see the food smeared across my uniform. Laughter erupted around me. Standing behind me, tray tilted, was Hannah. Her eyes sparkled with false innocence. "Oops," she said, voice lilting with mockery. "Clumsy me." She tilted her head, waiting for me to explode, to lash out, to prove I was exactly what she wanted the others to see: weak, unstable, dramatic. I swallowed hard, fighting back the heat in my chest, the sting behind my eyes. I forced myself to keep moving, setting the tray down at an empty table. My hands shook as I picked at the food, pretending not to notice the eyes still watching the whispers circling like vultures. Sergeant Wallace walked past, gave me a glance, then kept moving. His silence was as loud as laughter. The rumors began soon after. At first I thought it was paranoia, the kind that blooms when you are already on edge. But then I overheard two recruits in line at the firing range. "You hear about Bennett Word? Is she cheated to get in? Her scores were too high, had to be rigged." Another muttered, "Explains why she's always behind in drills." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where those whispers came from. Hannah. She had woven her poison into this place the same way she always had back home. By the end of the week, it seemed everyone had heard the story. Some recruits sneered when I walked past. Others avoided me as though my supposed dishonesty might rub off. The walls of Fort Jackson, meant to train me, now felt like they were closing in, suffocating me under a weight of suspicion. In the barracks, Hannah kept her act polished. To the drill sergeants, she was polite, quick with answers, always standing straight, always volunteering. In front of the other recruits, she played the role of charming friend. But when the lights dimmed, when the barracks grew quiet, she would lean over from her bunk and whisper, just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll crack soon. Everyone sees it. You'll be out before graduation." She savored each word like candy. Sometimes she left small messes in my area, moving my boots, scattering my folded shirts, knowing inspection would fall on me. Once, she even tore a page from my training manual and tucked it under my pillow. When Sergeant Wallace found it, his only words were, "Careless." The smirk on Hannah's face as he walked away nearly broke me. I tried to fight back in small ways. I wrote in a notebook recording each humiliation, each trick, each whisper I overheard. It was the only way I could remind myself that I wasn't imagining it, that this was real, deliberate, targeted. But every time I thought I could rise above it, Hannah found a way to drag me lower. During a team-building exercise when we were meant to lift heavy logs together, she deliberately shifted her weight to shove me off balance. I felt my knee slamming against the ground, and she laughed, claiming it was just part of the challenge. The others laughed with her, not out of cruelty perhaps, but because laughter was easier than questioning the golden girl of the unit. The pattern was clear. In Charleston, I had been the shadow. Here, I was being painted as the fraud. Hannah had learned that humiliation was more powerful when shared, when it became public spectacle. And I had learned that silence cut as deeply as cruelty. The silence of my fellow recruits who looked away. The silence of Sergeant Wallace, who should have enforced discipline but chose indifference. The silence of my own voice swallowed down because I feared being branded a complainer. But something inside me was changing. Every humiliation, every rumor, every shove carved into me not as wounds, but as marks of resistance. I began to feel the slow burn of anger solidify into resolve. I had been through this before in different forms with different weapons. The shredded prom dress, the stolen scholarship, the ruined relationship, Hannah's tools had always been deception and spectacle. Now she had simply upgraded her stage. But what she did not see, what she had never expected, was that I was watching. I was learning, and I was waiting. The day came when the whispers reached their peak. We were in formation, sweat streaming down our faces from push-ups when a recruit near me muttered under his breath, "Cheater!" The word sliced through the noise, sharper than any insult. My vision blurred, not from sweat, but from rage. I wanted to shout, to scream the truth, to tell them what Hannah was doing. But I clenched my jaw instead, forcing out each push-up until my arms shook. When Sergeant Wallace finally called us to rise, I stood chest-heaving, staring at Hannah. She smirked again, her face radiating victory. That night, lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I could not survive on silence alone. I needed proof, not just words written in a notebook, but undeniable evidence that Hannah was the one orchestrating my downfall. My father's voice echoed again, distant but steady. Win with truth, not fists. It was time to prepare, not just to endure. The sun at Fort Jackson has a way of turning the earth into a furnace. By the 4th week of training, our company was ordered into a long-distance run 5 miles across the dusty trails that cut through pine and red clay. The cadence began sharp voices echoing against the trees, but soon the rhythm broke down into gasps and grunts. My body ached from weeks of exhaustion, but I refused to fall behind. Each stride was agony, my lungs clawing for air, sweat soaking the back of my uniform. The ground beneath my boots blurred into endless dirt and gravel. I could hear Hannah's voice even before I saw her. She drifted into step beside me, her breathing steady, her smirk sharp enough to slice through the haze of heat. "Careful," she whispered loud enough for others to hear. "She's about to collapse again!" Laughter trickled down the line, a few recruits shaking their heads as though my failure was inevitable. My legs trembled, the weight of weeks of humiliation pressing down harder than the rucksack on my back. I stumbled, knees buckling, but caught myself before hitting the ground. A sharp shove came from the side, Hannah's elbow jamming into my ribs. The pain stole my breath, and I faltered. Gasps and chuckles rose behind me. The laughter of others was worse than the shove itself. For a moment, the world tilted. I wanted to scream, to swing back at her, to shove her into the dirt in front of everyone. My fists curled, nails biting into my palms, my vision tunneling until all I could see was her smirk. "Weak," she mouthed, "just for me." The word was the echo of my childhood, the soundtrack of every dinner table where I was dismissed every holiday, where she was praised every quiet moment where my worth was eroded. My chest heaved, rage threatening to spill out. I could end this right here. I could make her bleed, prove I wasn't the shadow she had always painted me to be. For one desperate heartbeat, violence tempted me like a flame promising release. But then I saw the other faces, the recruits running nearby, their eyes flicking between us, waiting eager for the spectacle. They wanted me to snap, to be the proof of the rumors Hannah had sown. I heard my father's voice again, clear and steady in the chaos of my mind. Truth, not fists. Strength, not surrender. I swallowed the scream, clawing up my throat, forced my fists to unclench, and pushed forward. Every step was torture, but it was also resistance. Hannah laughed, falling back slightly satisfied she had bruised me once more. But I kept running. I would not give her the victory of seeing me crumble. By the time we crossed the finish line, my body was shaking, my uniform drenched, my breath shallow. I bent over, hands on my knees, fighting the urge to collapse. Hannah walked past, her voice smooth, her smile cruel. Still standing, but for how long? The recruits around us laughed again. "Sergeant." Wallace blew his whistle, calling us into formation, never once acknowledging what had happened. His silence was as sharp as her words. That night, I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling muscles, screaming, ribs aching from her shove. I replayed the moment I nearly snapped, nearly gave her what she wanted. I had been inches from throwing away everything I had worked for. The weight of that realization pressed heavy, but beneath it was a spark of something new: control. I had chosen not to strike, not to break. That restraint was its own form of strength. I clung to it like a lifeline, a reminder that I could outlast her. And yet, the question haunted me. How much longer could I hold out? How many more humiliations before the dam finally broke? I whispered to myself in the dark. Not yet. Not this way. The promise steadied me, but the doubt lingered. Have you ever watched someone you love or someone you root for pushed to the edge, humiliated in front of everyone, and wondered if they should fight back immediately or hold their ground in silence? What would you have done if you were me in that moment? Tell me in the comments. I will read every word. The night after the long run, I lay awake in my bunk, ribs aching where Hannah had shoved me, my body exhausted, yet my mind racing. The barracks hummed with the quiet snores of recruits, the creak of beds as others shifted in uneasy sleep, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights that never quite turned off. My eyes traced the metal bars above me, but my thoughts drifted far from Fort Jackson. They drifted back to Charleston, to a memory of my father sitting with me on the porch years earlier. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that anchored me. Olivia, there will always be people who try to break you down with words or fists. But strength is not about hitting back harder. Strength is about proving them wrong with truth. Win with truth, not with anger. He had died before he could see me enlist, before he could see the chaos of my family consume me, but his words clung to me like armor now. For weeks, I had endured Hannah's taunts in silence, swallowing rage until it burned like acid in my chest. Tonight, though, a thought began to form, sharp and deliberate. Silence had only given her more ground. If I was going to survive this, I needed more than endurance. I needed proof. I turned the idea over and over in my mind as I stared at the ceiling. A notebook of humiliations was not enough. Words could be dismissed, twisted. But evidence, hard evidence, was undeniable. The Army respected facts. Commanders respected reports backed with clarity. If I could gather proof of Hannah's behavior, she would not be able to hide behind charm or whispers. She would have to face consequences. That thought lit a spark inside me. The next morning, still sore from the run, I moved slower than usual. At breakfast, I sat alone, my uniform freshly washed, but my body heavy with fatigue. That was when Private Jenkins sat down across from me. He was 21, taller than most, with a serious face that cracked only when he laughed, a rare thing, but genuine. He had watched Hannah's antics more than once, and unlike the others, he never joined in the laughter. He simply observed, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. He slid his tray down and nodded at me. "She's pushing you harder than anyone else," he said quietly. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but there was weight in it. I froze, unsure if this was pity or solidarity. "I see what she's doing," Jenkins added. "Don't let her get in your head." For a moment, I wanted to brush it off, to say I could handle it, to retreat into the silence I had always used as armor. But something about his tone, the way he had spoken without judgment, broke through. "You see it," I whispered, surprised by the tremor in my voice. "You see it too?" Jenkins nodded. "Everyone sees it, they just laugh because it's easier. But I don't laugh at cruelty." His words landed like a lifeline. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "I need proof. If I can show what she's doing, she won't be able to keep getting away with it." Jenkins studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "You're right, and I can help." The air between us shifted in that instant. For the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson, I felt I wasn't fighting alone. From that morning forward, the air around me felt different. I still carried the weight of humiliation, but now it had a shape, a purpose. After drill that day, when the others collapsed into their bunks or headed to chow, Jenkins lingered near my spot. He spoke low, careful, his eyes scanning the room to be sure no one else was listening. If you're serious about proof, you'll need more than memory. You need something that can't be argued away. His words echoed what I had already decided. I reached under my pillow and slid out a small object I had hidden since reception week. It was a pocket-sized voice recorder, one I had bought years earlier during college lectures. I had almost left it behind when I enlisted, but some instinct told me to keep it buried in the bottom of my bag. I placed it on my palm, the tiny metal case glinting under the dull barracks light. "This is all I have," I whispered. "It's not much, but it's a start." Jenkins studied it, then nodded. "Hide it in your locker. When she comes around, let it run. She'll slip. People like her always do." That night, as the barracks settled into uneasy silence, I crouched at my locker, my hands trembling slightly as I wedged the recorder into the corner beneath my folded shirts. My heart pounded with every creak of the bunks, afraid someone might notice, but no one stirred. The small click of the switch sliding on sounded louder than a rifle shot in the quiet room. I whispered to myself, "This is how it begins." The first few nights, the recorder caught little more than snores and restless shuffling. Hannah was cautious, choosing her moments when eyes were on her and ears were alert. But eventually, late one evening, after lights out, her whispers began. "You'll never make it," she hissed across the aisle. "I'll make sure of it." The words were muffled but clear enough. When I played them back the next day with Jenkins by my side, the sound sent chills down my spine. It wasn't enough for a formal report, not yet, but it was a thread, the beginning of a web. Jenkins leaned back, arms crossed. "Keep at it. She won't be able to resist forever. Bullies don't know when to shut up." We expanded the plan slowly, cautiously. I would keep the recorder running, capturing every bitter whisper, every deliberate insult. Jenkins, with his quiet confidence, offered something more. "I'll try to get footage," he said. "Phones aren't supposed to be out, but if the chance comes, I'll make it count." His voice was steady, without bravado. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was simply choosing sides, and for the first time, someone had chosen mine. The days dragged on Hannah's cruelty as steady as the beat of cadence. She knocked over my water canteen during drills, slipped salt into my coffee at breakfast, spread whispers that I had bribed my way into training. Each act stung, but now I forced myself to remain calm, to let her think she was winning. Each humiliation was a note, a recording a step closer to the day her mask would crack. The anger that once consumed me now sharpened into patience. Every smirk she gave me became fuel. At night, when I checked the recorder, the words piled up. Hannah's voice, dripping with disdain, was no longer just an echo in my head. It was captured, preserved, undeniable. Jenkins sometimes joined me in the quiet moments, his presence steady, his silence an anchor. Once he said, "One day she'll push too far, and when she does, you'll have everything you need." His certainty steadied me in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a partner in the fight. By the end of that week, the fear of breaking had shifted into something else. Resolve. My body still ached, my heart still bruised, but beneath it all was a growing sense of control. I was no longer just reacting. I was preparing. Every day brought me closer to the moment Hannah would overstep, and when she did, I would be ready. The South Carolina night wrapped itself around us like a suffocating blanket. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that clung to your skin and seeped into your bones. It was week 6 of training, and we had been ordered into a night march, packs strapped tight, rifles slung across our shoulders, boots crunching against gravel. The line of recruits stretched into the darkness, headlamps flickering like distant fireflies, each of us carrying 50 pounds of gear, plus the weight of exhaustion that had been building for weeks. My shoulders ached within minutes, my back screaming under the pack's weight. Every step was a battle against gravity. But I welcomed the darkness. In the shadows, the humiliation felt less sharp, the whispers less audible. I thought maybe for once I could just blend into the column and endure. But Hannah's presence was impossible to ignore. I could hear her voice drifting back through the line, her laughter carried on the damp air. She walked lightly, as if the weight barely touched her, while I dragged each step like it was my last. I focused on my breathing, one step then another, refusing to let her draw me in. Yet she always found a way. Halfway through the march, we reached a stretch of uneven ground where roots jutted out beneath the thin layer of dirt. My legs trembled as I stepped over one, nearly catching my boot. That was when I felt the sudden jolt, a hard shove against my back. My balance crumbled. I stumbled forward, the pack pulling me down my body, slamming into the ground with a thud that knocked the air from my lungs. My rifle struck the dirt beside me. My palms scraped raw against gravel. Pain shot through my ribs, sharp and unyielding. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. The world, blurred voices muffled around me. Somewhere above, I heard Hannah's voice dripping with mockery. She can't even handle a walk. Her laughter echoed in my skull, cruel and triumphant. My vision swam as I struggled to push myself up, every muscle screaming in protest. I gasped, pulling in shallow breaths, my ribs searing with each inhale. Boots shuffled past recruits moving around me, some muttering, others pretending not to see. Sergeant Wallace's whistle cut through the night, but he didn't stop. He didn't call Hannah out. His silence was louder than the cicadas buzzing in the trees. I pressed my palms into the dirt, grit grinding into open scrapes, and forced myself upright. My body screamed for rest, for surrender, but I bit down hard, tasting blood, and rose to my knees, then my feet. Each breath was a knife, but I refused to stay down. Hannah's shadow lingered beside me, her smirk visible even in the dim glow of headlamps. "Weak," she mouthed again, her lips curling into a smile I would never forget. The march continued, each step agony. My ribs burned with every movement, my back strained beneath the pack, and yet I kept going. The ground blurred beneath me, my focus narrowing to one thought: keep moving. The humiliation was unbearable, but the pain anchored me. This was no longer just training. This was survival. By the time we reached the checkpoint, my uniform clung to me with sweat, my face streaked with dirt, my breaths shallow and ragged. I wanted to collapse, to curl into the ground and disappear, but when I turned my head, I caught a glimpse of Jenkins a few rows back, his eyes locked on me. He gave the smallest nod, steady and deliberate, as though to say, "I saw it. You are not alone." For the first time since Hannah had begun her campaign, I felt a flicker of something stronger than pain. Hope. The march ended in a clearing lit by a few harsh floodlights, the kind that threw every shadow into sharp relief. My body screamed with every breath, my ribs throbbing, the pack digging into my shoulders like iron claws. I collapsed to my knees the moment we were dismissed, palms pressed into the dirt to keep from falling flat. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes, but it wasn't just exhaustion that weighed me down. It was the humiliation of hitting the ground because of her again. The smirk I'd seen when Hannah shoved me replayed over and over, her eyes sparkling as though this was all a game she was winning. I bent forward, gasping, trying to steady my breath, when I felt a shadow crouch beside me. "Jenkins." He kept his voice low, almost a whisper. "I got it," he said. My head snapped up, confusion cutting through the haze of pain. His hand tapped his pocket where his phone was hidden, his eyes scanning the field to be sure no one was watching. "She shoved you. I caught it on video. The whole thing." For a second my heart stopped. Proof. Actual proof. Not just whispers in the dark, not just recordings of taunts muffled by barracks noise. This was visible, undeniable, captured in the light of headlamps. Relief and terror collided in me at once. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking. You you filmed it." Jenkins nodded, his expression grim. "She picked the wrong time. She thought no one would notice in the dark. But I noticed." His certainty steadied me like a hand reaching into quicksand. I wanted to cry, but I forced the tears back, biting down on the pain in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the shuffle of boots around us. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, just nodded once more. "Keep moving forward. Your day is coming." The medics checked us quickly, giving only cursory glances. When I mentioned the pain in my side, one shrugged, muttered something about bruised ribs, and moved on. No one asked how it happened. No one questioned the shove. The silence of authority was as cruel as the act itself. But this time, the silence would not bury me. Back in the barracks, every step up the stairs was a fresh stab of agony. Hannah walked past me, her voice sweet enough for others to hear. "Long night, Olivia." You should really think about quitting. She smirked as if daring me to respond. My fists tightened, nails digging into my palms, but I kept walking, the knowledge of Jenkins's video burning like fire in my chest. Let her talk. Let her smirk. The clock was ticking and she didn't even know it. That night, lying in my bunk, I turned carefully to avoid the stabbing pain in my ribs. The barracks was dark except for the faint glow of the exit sign. Around me, recruits shifted in restless sleep. Hannah snored lightly across the aisle, her face peaceful, innocent, the mask she wore so well. Rage boiled inside me, but alongside it was something new. Power. For weeks, she had controlled the narrative, painting me as weak, as fraudulent as nothing. But now, I held the thread that could unravel her entire facade. I whispered into the dark words only I could hear. You will regret this. My voice was steady despite the pain. The vow echoed inside me stronger than the ache in my body. This moment was the turning point. No longer was I simply enduring. No longer was I waiting for fate to shift. I had the weapon I needed, the truth captured and undeniable. The following day during drills, I noticed Jenkins glance at me, once subtle, reassuring. He didn't need to say anything. That one look reminded me I was not alone in this fight. For the first time since I had set foot at Fort Jackson, I felt the ground shift beneath me, not as weakness pulling me down, but as strength rising to carry me forward. Hannah thought she had broken me that night on the march. What she didn't realize was that she had given me the final piece of the puzzle. The pain in my ribs would heal. The humiliation would fade. But the vow I made, the evidence Jenkins carried that would remain. The game had changed, and for once, it was Hannah who didn't see the trap forming beneath her feet. The days after the night march blurred into a haze of drills, weapons qualification, and aching ribs that throbbed every time I drew a deep breath. But through the exhaustion, one thought cut sharper than the pain. I finally had what I needed. The proof. Each night when the barracks quieted, I replayed Jenkins's video in my mind. Not the file itself, which he kept hidden carefully in his phone, but the image of Hannah's shove, her smirk illuminated by headlamps, and my body hitting the dirt. That image was no longer just a memory. It was evidence. I began organizing everything I had collected. The voice recorder hidden beneath my folded uniforms now held weeks of whispered threats, cruel remarks, and her late-night promises to see me fail. I flipped through my small notebook, the pages filled with neat lines of dates, times, and descriptions. Mess hall spill, barracks whispers, long run shove, night march assault. The list stretched across weeks, each entry a reminder of the storm I had endured. On the morning of the 9th week, while others grumbled over chow, I slipped away to the corner of the rec hall and gathered my courage. The company commander's office loomed like a fortress. The door closed, the nameplate polished to a shine. My heart pounded as I raised my hand to knock fear clawing at my throat. What if he dismissed me like everyone else had? What if this became another wound, another silence? But when the door opened and I stepped inside, I straightened my spine, clutching the folder I had assembled. Inside were printed transcripts from the recorder photographs of bruises I had taken quietly with Jenkins's help, and a small USB containing the audio files. Most importantly, Jenkins had transferred the video onto the drive, ensuring it couldn't be lost. The company commander, a tall man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to see too much, looked up from his desk. "Private Bennett, what is it?" His tone was clipped but not unkind. I swallowed, forcing the tremor from my voice. "Sir, I need to report misconduct. Ongoing misconduct. By Private Hannah Carter." His brows furrowed, but he gestured for me to continue. My hands shook as I placed the folder and USB on his desk. "Sir, this has been happening for weeks. Harassment, physical assault, targeted humiliation." I stayed silent, but "I can't anymore. I have evidence." The commander's eyes flicked over the documents, his expression unreadable. He picked up the USB, turning it in his hand. "You've gathered recordings?" he asked. His voice carried no judgment, only curiosity. "Yes, sir," I said firmly. "And a video, witnessed by another recruit." For a long moment the room was silent except for the hum of the overhead light. Then he leaned back, studying me with something I couldn't quite name. "Respect, pity. Maybe both." Bennett, you've done the right thing. We don't tolerate this kind of conduct. I'll review the evidence personally." He paused, his gaze steady. "It won't be swept aside." Relief crashed through me so sharply my knees nearly buckled. I managed a stiff nod, saluting with trembling fingers. "Thank you, sir." As I left the office, the weight on my chest eased for the first time in weeks. The scars of humiliation remained, the bruises still ached, but now the silence had been broken. For once, someone in authority had listened, and as I walked back toward the barracks, I felt the stirrings of something I had nearly lost hope. Graduation week arrived, draped in tension. The air at Fort Jackson buzzed with anticipation as uniforms were pressed to sharp edges, boots polished until they reflected the light, and recruits whispered about families flying in for the ceremony. For many, this was the moment of triumph, the reward for 10 grueling weeks. For me, it was a battlefield waiting to unfold. The folder was already out of my hands, the evidence safe in the commander's possession, but Hannah didn't know that. What she did know, what she could sense, was that something in me had shifted. On the morning of the parade, as I stood by my locker, double-checking every fold of my uniform, Hannah's reflection appeared in the metal. Her smile was slow-practiced, the kind of smile she had always worn before cutting me down. She stepped closer, her voice low so others wouldn't hear. "You look almost proud of yourself, Olivia. But pride doesn't suit you. Weakness does." Her words curled around me like smoke, familiar yet more desperate this time, as though she needed me to believe them. I kept my eyes on my own reflection, steadying my breath. "You don't scare me anymore," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The flicker in her eyes was quick, almost hidden, but I caught it. She wasn't expecting resistance. She leaned closer, lips inches from my ear. "Mom and Dad will be here today. I can't wait to see their faces when you trip in front of everyone. They'll finally see you for what you are, a failure." The old me would have flinched, would have curled inward, would have carried those words like weights. But standing there, ribs still aching yet heart steady, I realized how hollow her threat was. The real failure was not in stumbling, not in bruises or dirt. The real failure was cruelty, and for the first time she seemed smaller to me, her voice less sharp, her power less certain. I turned, meeting her eyes directly. "The only person who's going to fall today is you." The smirk faltered only for a second, but it was enough. She scoffed, rolling her eyes, masking the crack in her armor. Still dramatic, she muttered, stepping back. "We'll see who's laughing in the end." She walked away, her stride confident, but her shoulders stiffer than usual. As I finished readying myself, Jenkins passed by, adjusting his uniform. His glance was brief, but the smallest nod passed between us, a silent reminder that the truth was already in motion. I held on to that thought like a shield. The parade ground loomed ahead, rows of seats filling with proud families, the weight of ceremony pressing down like the Carolina sun. I could see Linda and Richard in the crowd, Linda's posture sharp, Richard's grin smug. They had come expecting another performance, another chance to favor Hannah. They didn't know what was coming. Behind the formation line, Hannah caught my eye one last time. She mouthed the word weak, her lips curling her gaze, daring me to crumble. But this time, instead of shrinking, I straightened. The humiliation, the bruises, the endless whispers they had forged something inside me that she would never understand. Today, the truth was no longer hidden in notebooks or buried in silence. It was waiting to surface, and she had no idea how public it would be. As the drums of the ceremony began to beat echoing across the field, I clenched my jaw and whispered to myself, steady and certain, "This ends today." The parade ground stretched wide beneath the South Carolina sun, rows of recruits standing rigid in formation, the sharp beat of drums reverberating through the humid air. Families filled the bleachers, their cheers and applause rolling like thunder. I stood at attention, heart-hammering sweat sliding beneath the collar of my crisp dress uniform. This was supposed to be a day of honor, of pride, of beginnings. For me, it was also the day truth would finally step into the light. From my place in the formation, I could see Linda and Richard seated near the front, their posture as polished as if they owned the place. Linda's chin was high, her gaze scanning the rows until it landed on Hannah, pride softening her features. Richard leaned close to her, saying something that made them both smile. Their eyes never lingered on me. They hadn't come to see Olivia Bennet succeed. They had come to bask in Hannah Carter's glow. The ceremony began with speeches the Command Sergeant Major booming about resilience, sacrifice, and honor. His words washed over me, but my focus stayed on the company commander standing at the podium, his expression stern, his folder thick with documents. My stomach tightened. He held the file that contained weeks of my pain, the recordings, the photographs, and Jenkins's video. My breath caught when he stepped forward, signaling for silence. Before we proceed with the awarding of completion certificates, he said, his voice carrying across the field, "It is my duty to address a matter of conduct within this company. It is not common to do so at a graduation ceremony, but integrity demands that it be done here now." The crowd shifted uneasily. Murmurs rippled through the bleachers. I felt the air change thick with anticipation. The commander's eyes swept across the formation, pausing on Hannah. "Private Hannah Carter," he announced, his tone unyielding, "has been found in violation of Army standards of conduct. Evidence has been presented, including eyewitness accounts and video documentation showing repeated harassment and physical assault of a fellow recruit. Such behavior is unacceptable in this Army." The words struck the air like lightning. Gasps rose from the crowd, heads turned toward Hannah, whose face drained of color before flushing bright red. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a look I had never seen on her before: panic. Linda shot to her feet, her voice cutting across the silence. "This is outrageous! You can't do this to my daughter!" Richard followed, shouting, "This is a setup! Olivia planted this!" Their words clashed against the commander's composure, but he didn't falter. "Private Carter will be escorted from the field and placed under review for disciplinary action, including potential Article 15 proceedings." Two MPs moved forward, their steps steady, their faces impassive. Hannah stood frozen for a beat too long, then hissed under her breath, her eyes locking with mine. "You'll pay for this." The venom in her voice carried, but it was drowned by the rustle of shock in the audience and the sharp command of the MPs ordering her to move. As she was led away, her boots scraping against the gravel, I felt something I had never felt before in all the years of her torment. Not triumph, not revenge, but release. The weight she had placed on me for so long lifted just slightly enough for me to stand taller in formation. The commander returned to the podium, his voice steady. "This Army is built on values: loyalty, duty, respect, integrity, honor, courage, and selfless service. Today we celebrate those who embody them, and we hold accountable those who do not. Let this be a reminder that no one is above the standard." The crowd hushed. The drums resumed. The ceremony pressed forward, but nothing would ever be the same. The silence after the commander's words felt heavier than the drums. For a heartbeat, the entire parade ground seemed frozen. Eyes locked on Hannah as the MPs flanked her. She tried to keep her chin high, but the stiffness of her stride betrayed the fear that had replaced her bravado. The sound of her boots against the gravel was louder than the drums had been minutes earlier. Each step an admission that the game she had been playing was over. Linda's voice cut through the quiet like shattered glass. "This is a disgrace. She's your best recruit, and you humiliate her in front of everyone." Her words carried sharp with desperation. Richard surged to his feet, red-faced, his hand clenching the bleacher rail. "This is Olivia's doing. She's jealous. She always has been." The families around them recoiled, whispers rising in waves. Some stared in shock. Others shook their heads, but most watched with the kind of fascination that comes only when hidden rot is suddenly exposed to daylight. From my place in formation, I forced myself to remain still, chin level, shoulders square. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, to shrink from the chaos unraveling in the stands. But I held my ground. After years of being invisible, of carrying bruises in silence, I would not vanish now. This was not just my moment, it was the truth finally breaking through the walls they had built around me. The MPs tightened their hold as Hannah twisted her voice, dripping with venom. "This isn't over, Olivia. You hear me? This isn't over." Her words cracked more plea than promise, but they echoed across the field nonetheless. The commander didn't flinch. He gestured, and the MPs escorted her toward the edge of the parade ground, her protests fading into the hum of voices. Linda shoved past those seated near her, calling after Hannah. "Baby, they don't understand you! We'll fight this!" Richard's voice rose sputtering with rage. "You'll regret siding with her. You'll regret this day." His finger jabbed in my direction, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the sting of accusation. I felt only the hollow ring of his words, empty now that the evidence stood against them. The audience murmured louder. A woman near the front whispered, "That poor girl," glancing at me with a kind of sympathy I wasn't used to seeing. A man in uniform behind her muttered, "Army doesn't play around with that stuff. They'll make sure justice sticks." Their voices wove together a chorus of truth, stronger than any lie Hannah could spin. Sergeant Wallace blew his whistle sharp and commanding, and the formation stiffened again. The ceremony pressed forward, but the shift in air was undeniable. Pride and shame had swapped places on that field. For every cheer that rose for the recruits stepping forward, there was also the shadow of what had been revealed. When my name was called, I stepped forward, my ribs still sore, my breath steady. I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, some curious, some sympathetic, some proud. I marched with every ounce of strength I had left, lifted my chin, and received my certificate with hands that no longer trembled. As I turned back into formation, I caught Linda's eyes. She glared at me, fury etched deep, but beneath it I saw something else, fear. Fear of the truth, fear of losing control. Fear that the daughter she had dismissed as weak had proven unbreakable. Richard shook his head, muttering under his breath, but his words no longer carried weight. Their power over me had fractured, exposed for all to see. The drums thundered one last time, closing the ceremony. Families cheered, cameras flashed, and recruits embraced their loved ones. I stood still for a moment, breathing in the heat, the noise, the weight of it all. My body ached, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. Hannah was gone, her smirk silenced, and though Linda and Richard still fumed, their voices had been drowned out by something far stronger, the truth spoken publicly, unshakable, undeniable. I whispered to myself so quietly only I could hear, "You didn't break me," and for the first time I believed it. The ceremony ended with applause and scattered cheers, but the weight of what had unfolded clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Families filed out, snapping pictures, hugging their recruits, laughter spilling across the field. Yet for the Carter family, it was no celebration. Hannah had been escorted away by MPs. Linda and Richard left fuming in the stands, and I stood quietly to the side, my certificate in hand, my body sore but unbowed. Within hours, the official process began. Hannah's name was read off in the company bulletin. She would face Article 15, non-judicial punishment for conduct unbecoming of a soldier and assault of a fellow recruit. The words were stark on the page, stripped of excuses, devoid of the spin she had always managed to weave. For once, her actions had consequences no smirk could erase. The company grapevine buzzed with the news whispers following me as I walked through the halls. Some nodded in quiet respect. Others avoided my eyes, unsure how to face the reality of what they had laughed at only weeks before. Sergeant Wallace's silence was the most telling. He had ignored every shove, every spill, every taunt. Now his posture seemed smaller, his gaze never meeting mine. He called cadence with the same sharp tone, but I could hear the crack in his authority. He had turned his head too many times, and the commander's decision was a reminder that looking away carried its own cost. The Article 15 hearing was swift. Jenkins testified steady and clear, recounting the shove during the night march. The video was shown privately, not in front of the company, but within the hearing room, undeniable in its clarity. Hannah's defense collapsed almost instantly. She was sentenced to extra duty, loss of pay, and a permanent mark in her record. The whispers spread faster than the punishment itself. Everyone knew that Mark could follow her, shadowing every step of her Army career. Some said she would be discharged within months. Others muttered she might hang on, but her path was stained. Back in Charleston, the story reached home faster than I expected. Families called each other neighbors, gossiped on porches. By the time Linda returned, the whispers were already circling that Hannah had been punished, that Olivia had exposed her, that the Carter family's perfect image had cracked wide open. Richard stormed into the house furious, blaming everyone but Hannah. Linda tried to hush the rumors, insisting it was all exaggerated, but in a town where reputations were currency, the truth had already stuck. I learned of their unraveling through phone calls. First, my cousin left a voicemail, her voice half sympathetic, half gleeful. "Olivia, people are saying Hannah's career is finished. Everyone's talking about it. Aunt Linda can't even go to the grocery store without people whispering." Then came a neighbor's message, one I never expected. "We always wondered why you looked so sad growing up. Now we know." Their words were a bomb-proof that silence had finally been broken, not just here at Fort Jackson, but back home, too. The calls from Linda were different. She rang me 3 times in one day, her voice trembling between anger and pleading. "Olivia, please. She's still your sister. You can't let them do this to her. She made a mistake, yes, but family protects each other." I held the phone in my hand, listening to the woman who had excused every cruelty, who had never once protected me. Her words stung, but they also crystallized something I had always known deep down. I answered calmly, my tone colder than I expected. "Family protects you, not destroys you. You chose her side every time she hurt me. This time, I chose mine." There was silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice brittle. But for the first time in my life, her threat carried no weight. I hung up my hand steady. Richard tried once too, his voice booming through the phone. "You think you've won? You think the army will save you from family." His words rolled like thunder, but I let them pass. "The army didn't save me," I said evenly. "The truth did." Then I ended the call. In the weeks that followed, the fallout deepened. Hannah's absence in formation was glaring, her bunk stripped bare. Recruits whispered about her name, but the story was no longer mine to carry. It had been etched into official records beyond her manipulation. Back in Charleston, the Carter house became quieter, the laughter that once spilled from their parties silenced by shame. Linda stopped posting her proud family updates. Richard stopped bragging about his 2 strong daughters. Their silence was its own confession. For me, the consequences were different. The bruises on my ribs healed slowly, but respect from my peers came faster than I expected. Jenkins became more than an ally. He became a friend, someone who reminded me each day that resilience wasn't about silence, but about standing tall even when your knees shook. And for the first time, when I looked in the mirror at the reflection of a 19-year-old soldier, I didn't see the shadow of Hannah's smirk or Richard's mocking eyes. I saw someone who had survived, who had stood against years of cruelty and refused to bow. I saw Olivia Bennett, not weak, not invisible, but unbroken. The Carter name might have cracked, but mine had finally begun to stand for something, and I would not give it back. The weeks after Hannah's removal carried a strange quiet. The barracks no longer rang with taunts aimed my way. The mess hall felt different too, not a place of ambush, but a place to eat in peace, to laugh softly with others without glancing over my shoulder. My ribs still ached, but each day the pain dulled, replaced by a steadier rhythm in my breath, a strength I hadn't known before. Physical training, once my enemy, began to feel like a proving ground I could finally own. On the first morning run after Hannah's departure, I braced myself for the usual smirks, the cutting comments. They never came. Instead, I heard Jenkins's voice at my shoulder. "Keep pace with me," he said, his tone calm, steady. I pushed harder, lungs, burning legs, screaming, but this time I didn't fall back. I crossed the finish line alongside him, sweat pouring, chest heaving, but upright. For the first time in weeks, I felt proud not of surviving, but of competing. Jenkins became my quiet anchor. He never treated me like a victim. He never asked for gratitude. Instead, he showed up in formation in drills, in the unspoken solidarity of someone who had seen the worst and still believed in me. We ate chow together, traded stories in low voices when lights went out, and laughed quietly over the absurdities of training life. His friendship wasn't dramatic, wasn't flashy. It was steady, dependable, the kind of bond that asked for nothing but gave everything. The more I trained, the more my body responded. I passed my marksmanship test with a score that surprised even me. The rifle felt less like a burden, more like an extension of my focus. During tactical drills, my squad began looking to me for decisions not because I was the loudest, but because I was steady under pressure. Respect grew in small ways, a nod from a fellow recruit after I aced a drill, a smile from one who once looked away in the mess hall. Piece by piece, the identity Hannah had tried to crush rebuilt itself stronger than before. At night, I still thought of Charleston, of Linda's angry calls, of Richard's threats. But those voices grew distant, muffled by the sound of my own determination. In the dark barracks, Jenkins leaned across the aisle one night, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know they'll always try to come back. People like that don't let go easy." I looked at him, my breath slow and steady. "Then I'll keep proving them wrong." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said he believed me. The bruises faded, the nightmares quieted, and in their place came something unexpected: validation. Not from Linda, not from Richard, not even from Hannah's downfall. It came from within, from the sweat on my skin after a hard run, from the laughter of a friend, from the steady beat of my own heart refusing to quit. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Recognition came slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon, almost invisible until it was undeniable. It started with nods from other recruits after a clean drill. Then came small words of encouragement during runs, good pace Bennett or Nice shot. They were simple, almost casual, but each one landed like a stone thrown into still water ripples, spreading deep. I had spent so long bracing for scorn that the weight of respect felt foreign, almost startling. One afternoon in the mailroom, my name was called. I wasn't expecting anything, so when the envelope slid into my hand, my chest tightened. The handwriting was careful, familiar. I tore it open to find a letter from an old high school friend I hadn't spoken to in years. She'd seen something about me in a local paper back in Charleston, a mention of recruits from the area at Fort Jackson. She wrote, "I always knew you were stronger than they made you believe. Keep fighting. I'm proud of you." My eyes blurred and I tucked the letter carefully into my locker, reading it again before lights out that night. Gary, my father's brother, who had always stayed on the edges of our family, sent a card too. He didn't write much, just a few lines, but his words mattered. "Your dad would be proud. Don't let their shadows cover your light." I hadn't thought about my father in weeks, but suddenly his memory wasn't just a wound. It was a compass. Among my peers, the shift grew clearer. During weapons qualification, my score placed me near the top of the platoon. When Sergeant Wallace barked "Bennett," not bad, it wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't dismissal either. For me, it was a turning point. I wasn't invisible anymore. Evening drills became moments of quiet camaraderie. A few of the recruits who once laughed at Hannah's side now gravitated toward me, asking for help on form, on endurance pacing. They didn't apologize outright, but their gestures spoke louder: shared water during breaks, a spot saved in line, a quiet thanks after practice. Each moment chipped away at the isolation I'd carried for so long. Jenkins noticed it too. One night, after lights out, he leaned over and muttered, "Told you. People respect truth when they see it." I didn't answer right away, just let the words settle. He was right. Respect built on truth lasted longer than fear built on cruelty. I wrote in my journal almost every night, pages filling with thoughts I'd once buried. At first, it was a way to keep track of Hannah's harassment. Now it became something else, a record of growth, of small victories, of laughter that felt earned. One Sunday afternoon, as the sun dipped low, we sat outside the barracks after chapel service. Jenkins handed me half a sandwich, and I realized I wasn't carrying dread in my chest anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, not because someone else allowed it, but because I had claimed it. I looked up at the flag fluttering above Fort Jackson, the wind tugging it sharp against the sky, and I whispered to myself, "This is my life now. Mine. Not Linda's, not Richard's, not Hannah's. Mine." That night, I slipped my friend's letter back from the locker and tucked it beneath my pillow. I didn't need it to sleep anymore, but I wanted it close. A reminder that recognition wasn't about loud applause or public approval. It was about knowing deep down that I no longer lived in their shadow. The day I stood on the parade ground to receive the Army Achievement Medal, the sky over Fort Jackson was a clean Carolina blue. The air was sharp with the scent of freshly cut grass, the kind of detail that might have gone unnoticed months ago but now seemed etched into my memory as clearly as the metal in the commander's hand. My uniform fit differently that morning, not looser or tighter, but prouder, as though every stitch held the weight of what I had survived. When my name was called, I stepped forward, the sound of my boots steady. No hesitation, no tremor. The medal was pinned on my chest with deliberate care. Private Olivia Bennett, the commander said, his voice carrying across the field, for resilience, perseverance, and conduct that reflects the highest values of the United States Army. His words struck deeper than I expected. Resilience, perseverance. Words my family had never spoken about me. Words Hannah had mocked, Linda had dismissed, Richard had sneered at. And now they were spoken in front of an entire battalion, carved into official record, impossible to erase. Applause rose modest but sincere. Jenkins clapped the hardest, his grin wide, his eyes bright with pride that mirrored my own. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in, not just the recognition, but the truth that I had earned it without anyone's permission. Linda and Richard weren't there. After the public exposure during graduation, they had vanished from the bleachers, their absence louder than their earlier shouts. I hadn't heard from them since Linda's last voicemail pleading for me to forgive, to let Hannah's punishment be enough. I had deleted it before she finished her sentence. Family is supposed to protect you, not destroy you. That was the truth I carried now. Family wasn't in blood ties that bound me to cruelty. Family was Jenkins handing me a sandwich after a drill, my high school friend sending a letter across states to say she believed in me, the uncle who reminded me of my father's pride. Family was every recruit who nodded at me with quiet respect, every comrade who decided I belonged because I had proven it in sweat and silence. After the ceremony ended, I lingered on the field as the crowd dispersed. The medal pressed against my chest with a weight both heavy and freeing. I thought of Hannah, of her smirk the day she pushed me during drill, of the venom in her voice when she hissed that I was weak. She was gone now, dragged out before the very crowd she once tried to impress. Her career broken, her lies shattered. But I didn't feel triumph. What I felt was clarity. The opposite of weakness wasn't revenge, it was truth spoken and lived without fear. I remembered the journal entries I had filled, the bruises, photographed the whispers Jenkins and I had exchanged in the dark. Every choice I made led me here, to this medal, to this moment, to this freedom. My strength hadn't been born from fighting harder than Hannah. It had been born from refusing to let her define me. That evening, as the sun fell low, Jenkins and I walked to the edge of the training field. He nudged me with his shoulder. "So, Private Bennett, what's next?" I smiled, not because I knew the answer, but because the question no longer filled me with dread. "Next," I said, "I live on my own terms." He nodded, satisfied, as if that was the only answer worth giving. Later, in the quiet of the barracks, I held the medal in my hands. Its shine reflected not just the months at Fort Jackson, but the years of silence I had endured, the years of being told I wasn't enough. Now, this small piece of metal proved otherwise, not to Linda, not to Richard, not even to Hannah. It proved it to me. I slipped the medal back onto my uniform, folded it neatly, and whispered into the empty room, "I choose my family. I choose myself." And to you listening now, have you ever had to cut ties with someone who claimed to be family but showed you nothing but cruelty? Have you ever learned the hard way that real family is chosen, not forced? Tell me your story in the comments. I'll read every word. Because in the end, survival isn't about who stands against you. It's about who stands with you. And sometimes the bravest choice you can make is to walk away from the blood that hurts you and build your life with the ones who protect you.